Welcome into a new BVM Sports Chalk Talk. I'm Mike Cianciolo, joined alongside Scott Procter and Matt Morris. After 3 weeks, the Chicago Bears have finally figured out what they have at quarterback, and the man under center hasn't really been able to get anything going. But is that their fault or the coach's fault? A historically bad offensive performance against the Cleveland Browns in Week 3 with rookie Justin Fields under center has shown that the Bears haven't quite been able to put it together, and maybe they won't be able to put it together. So, guys, Scott in particular, does Matt Nagy have any leash left at head coach, or does he need to be fired ASAP?
Yeah, so listen, I was on this show last week full of excitement and joy about the pro debut of Justin Fields at quarterback for the Chicago Bears. And by Sunday afternoon, those feelings turned into disappointment, frustration, anger. I mean, look what it did to my hair. I mean, come on, the proof is in the pudding. Now, with the Chicago Bears as currently constructed, with the rookie quarterback making his first start, going into First Energy Stadium and beat a really good Cleveland Browns team? No. But could and should it have looked much better than it did? Absolutely. Justin Fields' receivers were open on just 29% of plays on Sunday. That was the worst in the NFL in Week 2. His offensive line allowed a 50% pressure rate on Sunday. That was the worst in the NFL in Week 2. Justin Fields was failed by Matt Nagy and the entirety of that offensive lineup, from offensive line to receivers. Now, with that being said, I'm a bit more optimistic than you, I believe, Matt. Mainly because Justin Fields' debut was an abject disaster. We can all agree to that. But most rookie quarterback debuts are rough, especially if they happen to be on the road against Myles Garrett, against one of the league's best teams. And secondly, as I mentioned a couple weeks ago on this show when we discussed the Green Bay Packers and their disastrous start to this season, a stimulus package is on the way for the Chicago Bears in the form of the Detroit Lions. Although they have hung tough through 3 weeks here of the 2021 season. And finally, the Bears schedule is absolutely brutal after this weekend, but there are some good opportunities to show improvement against some really good teams. The Raiders, the Packers, the Buccaneers, and the 49ers are all on the Bears slate ahead of their Week 10 bye. So to answer your question, Mike, there is a path for Matt Nagy to save his job. And it begins with actually developing a competent game plan tailored to your explosive, dynamic rookie quarterback, beating the Detroit Lions on Sunday and beating a couple really good teams before the Week 10 bye. So all that to say, I'm a bit more optimistic than probably my guy Matt Morris here, but a lot of work to be done and a lot of disappointment in the air in Chicago. What do you feel about all that, Matt? Talk to me.
Well, Scott, I went into the weekend really expecting the worst, and somehow I underrated how bad it would be. I actually went into it expecting that this was going to go poorly. I even said on this show last week that I wasn't excited about the Justin Fields start because I knew that Matt Nagy would not put him in a position to succeed. And I was right, but I wasn't right enough because I couldn't think that it would be this bad. And my issue is that I think Matt Nagy needs to be fired right now because of how bad this has been. And this isn't just something where this is Matt Nagy's first year and he's trying to figure these things out. This is his, fourth, going on almost basically 4 years in Chicago, and he has nothing to prove for it. He's an offensive guru. That's what he was touted as, from the Andy Reid tree, and he's supposed to be this great guy. His offenses have been the worst in the league basically every single year, except for that first year. And honestly, that one was a solid team, and it was great, but even they were carried by the best defense in the league and also one of the best scoring defenses in the league. So he didn't even have to worry about scoring back then because he knew that his defense with Khalil Mack and Vic Fangio running it would be able to carry the load all the way into the playoffs. And my issue above all else is that even you look at the New York Jets last weekend, who got shut out in Denver, offensively, they had a better game. They actually had better stats getting shut out against Denver than Matt Nagy did with Justin Fields and that offense. And the other issue is that it's not like this is a one-time thing. Like with the Green Bay Packers that you referenced, one, there's no way. I mean, the Green Bay Packers entered the season Super Bowl contenders. They're still Super Bowl contenders. They had a bad loss. The Bears may be 8-8 this season, maybe getting to the playoffs. So what is your goal for this season? If it is making the playoffs, Matt Nagy is not going to get you to do that, so you might as well get him out of there. The other thing is that he continues to make just dumb mistakes. In the sense, like, right before Justin Fields got the start, he said that he was impressed with how he was doing with those first team reps, as if maybe you should have been doing that sooner. He continues to act like he's the smartest guy in the room when he clearly isn't, talking about, oh, he's not going to say whether Andy Dalton or Justin Fields is going to be his quarterback because that might give away some scheme. Well, when you don't use Justin Fields' legs at all, it doesn't affect the scheme. Myles Garrett and the Cleveland Browns had a field day. They completely went into that game expecting the Bears to be smart and use Justin Fields' mobility and quick passes and other things to help a rookie quarterback in his first start against one of the better defenses in the league. And that did not happen. And they made the Bears pay because of it. And another interesting thing, if you looked at Andy Dalton just in the last game against Cincinnati, he had a lot of quick passes. Like, there were a lot of check down passes. Get the ball out of your hands quickly, create a rhythm. You didn't see that with Justin Fields. And I think that's a huge issue as to why this was a fail from beginning to end. They did not run the ball. They only ran it 12 times with David Montgomery. There were no short, quick passes. There was no help on the offensive line when you're going up against some of the best pass rushers in the league. And they just didn't optimize anything that, Justin Fields was going to be able to do to actually have a chance to not win this game, but be competitive and give this guy some confidence moving forward. And at this point, now they're saying that Nick Foles, Andy Dalton, and Justin Fields are all in the running to be starting quarterback this upcoming week against the Detroit Lions, who, although they are winless, have played fairly well so far against legitimate teams in the Packers and the Ravens. And even San Francisco. And so you have to ask yourself this question. You've seen it with Andy Dalton, you've seen him with Justin Fields, and you've seen him with Nick Foles. What is the best possible outcome out of all this? You beat Detroit and then lose 5 straight? Matt Nagy has overstayed his welcome in Chicago, and he has done nothing any single season to prove that he deserves the chance to finish out the season. And so they should just cut their losses and try and at least save the season and create some momentum heading into next year.
So this is where I have to defend Matt Nagy a little bit, as hard as that is to do on a day like today. Before I ask you a question, Matt.
Sure.
You talk about Nagy's past over the past 3 or 4 seasons, specifically on the offensive side of the ball, because as you mentioned, he's supposed to be an offensive mind, an offensive guru coming from the Andy Reid tree, spending time around, Alex Smith and, what has been a dynamic Chiefs offense for the last decade or so. But if we're being honest, and I've been consistent about this, and it's why I thought the Bears were at best an 8-8 team, or, a 9-8, 8-9 now with an extra game. Have the Bears in the last 3 to 4 years, or at least since Matt Nagy has been the head coach of the Bears, have they had a good offensive line? The answer to that question is an astounding no. Mm-hmm. And then I go to the skill positions where David Montgomery is a good back, and I like him. I think we both do.
Over 1,000 yards last year.
I don't know if either of us would call him a top 10 back. David Montgomery is probably the brightest spot of the Chicago Bears offense. And then if that's the case, again, talking about a back like David Montgomery, who we believe is a good football player, if that's your shining prize of your offensive scheme, things probably aren't going to go so well. And I have to look at Allen Robinson as well, because I've been a critic of him since he landed in Chicago. He's been touted as a quarterback-proof receiver, somebody who has produced in the league for multiple years. He has multiple seasons of 1,000 yards with kind of nobody's throwing him the ball. But you're supposed to be that guy if you're Allen Robinson. You spent this offseason, sending, subliminal shots into the media that you want a payday from the Chicago Bears. You want long-term extension. You dropped a touchdown last week, 2 weeks ago in week 2, that could have been Justin Fields' first NFL touchdown. I constantly see Allen Robinson being plastered by man-to-man coverage. This man has 86 yards through 3 games. That's not going to cut it. And again, we're already talking about an offense that has a below-average offensive line, that has below-average skill weapons. So I say all that to say Matt Nagy deserves a ton of blame for what has happened, how the Chicago Bears offense has looked since he's been running it. But it really cannot fall all on his shoulders. And it's why I'm willing to give him at least another more week, knowing the Detroit Lions are on the schedule this week, to hopefully get Justin Fields right and develop a game plan that is tailored to his skill set. And now to my question to you, Matt, since you believe that Matt Nagy should have been fired yesterday, how does that make this situation better? Because again, you traded up to draft Justin Fields. And although it has been, like I said, pretty much a disaster through 3 weeks of the season, how can you justify drafting a quarterback, trading up to draft a quarterback, and firing your head coach 3 to 4 weeks into the season? How does that make this situation better? I just don't see it. Like I said, my preferred method is to give them this week against the Detroit Lions. It's a game you should win. Although, we mentioned the Lions have looked good, but even in that case, the Lions have looked good. So that would be a respectable win. And again, it's also obviously a division win. All those games are big. So I just don't see, the urge, the need to fire him at this moment, as bad as he has been. So walk me through that process.
To answer those questions, a few things. One, I do know that the Bears' offensive line has been horrible. I think everyone does. It's no surprise, and that's something that everyone can admit to. But here's the issue. If you know you have a bad offensive line, why are you trying to make Nick Foles your quarterback and be a drop-back passer? If you know you have a bad offensive line and you're about to go up against Jadeveon Clowney.
Matt, I don't know why you brought that up out the gate, because Nick Foles hasn't played a snap this season.
But this has been my point is that Matt Nagy has known that he has had a bad offensive line at least the last 2 years. So last season with Nick Foles and Mitch Trubisky, this year heading into the year, because they didn't really do anything to fix it. They drafted a guy. Obviously, he's now hurt. They brought in Jason Peters as some sort of aged Band-Aid. My point is that if you know it's this bad, why are you doing nothing to try and address it or try and hide that weakness in your game? In particular, when you have had multiple, not just solid running backs, but you've had multiple quarterbacks that are somewhat mobile. David, why aren't you doing anything to alleviate the danger that having a bad offensive line can give you? Instead, you're having Justin Fields, who I believe ran, what did he run on the 40? Like a 4.4 or something?
Fast. That's what he ran. Fast.
Hey, fast. You have him just dropping straight back. You're not moving the pocket at all. You're not having any RPOs. You're not having any quarterback runs. You're doing nothing except allowing Myles Garrett to pin his ears back and go right at your quarterback, your rookie quarterback, who, to your point, is the prized possession of the Chicago Bears because they traded up to get him. And that leads into my second answer. Matt Nagy has made it clear that he doesn't want to optimize Justin Fields' ability to be successful. And in some cases, I think he's trying to hinder it. It seems like he is. And so the benefit of getting rid of him now is you can at least have an interim coach or have somebody start to work with Fields and prepare for the future. And then you start the process.
But is that person in-house? Because you can't bring somebody in midseason. Is that person in-house? And if it is, then why isn't that person already working with Justin Fields on a daily basis to improve his game, to improve this offensive scheme? I just don't see Matt Nagy being fired right now 3-4 weeks into the season and that being a positive for the Bears, not only for the rest of this year, but moving forward. Because again,
I think it's a positive because Matt Nagy isn't making the calls anymore. He's not the one making the play calls. He talked about relinquishing that. He also talked about that last season where they were in a slump. That never ended up happening. They ended up being 8-8 and having a lackluster performance against a Drew Brees Saints team that was limping into the playoffs themselves. Right. So the benefit of getting rid of Matt Nagy is Matt Nagy cannot affect the team anymore because he can't get out of his own way. Like I said, he thinks he's the smartest guy in the room and he's going to force his way onto everyone else until it works. And it has not worked.
I'm just more of the idea as of right now that, the Chicago Bears were never going to go into First Energy Stadium on Sunday and beat a really good Cleveland Browns team. That just wasn't going to happen as currently constructed for the many reasons I mentioned about that offense that has nothing to do with Matt Nagy or Justin Fields. But the Detroit Lions on the schedule this week. You have a chance to get it right with another week of practice and move on to a tough part of your schedule where if you play well, if you can steal a win against the Raiders, who are undefeated, who a lot of people like right now, if you're able to steal a huge division win over your arch rival, the Green Bay Packers, in a couple of weeks, and again, Justin Fields starts to improve, looks better, I think the tune on Matt Nagy and the Chicago Bears can change very quickly here in a matter of weeks.
I'll ask one other thing. So there was pressure on Justin Fields in the Cincinnati Bengals game.
Yes.
Which was made very clear. Fields was able to get out of it a little bit. Did you see any change in the protection around Fields from that Cincinnati game to the Cleveland Browns game?
I mean, I can't say I have. If anything, it got worse. It got worse.
Yeah. And so then heading into, I believe, halftime, it was still a close game. It was like 10-3.
Right.
And Cleveland was ahead. So you're down a touchdown at halftime. You have been able to do nothing against this Cleveland defense. Was there any adjustment from the game plan at all?
From halftime on, I can't say that there was, Matt.
That is why Matt Nagy needs to be fired.
Yeah. Well, I mean, since we're throwing out hypothetical questions, let me toss a couple your way. What team has a below average offensive line or an objectively bad offensive line and has an effective offense or a good team right now? I don't think that exists.
Miami Dolphins.
What do they have?
A bad offensive line.
And what's their record this season, Matt? They're 1-2. They've lost 2 games straight since beating the.
And what happened to their prize quarterback?
He's injured, right?
That's what's going to happen to Justin Fields. You can at least try and get rid of this issue and the worry of Justin Fields just getting pummeled like he did against Cleveland.
But again, here's the thing: you fire Matt Nagy, that offensive line is still
yeah. But now somebody might be able to actually call plays that don't make the offensive line have to go one-on-one against Myles Garrett.
We'll see, man. That was just an abject failure. But hopefully, when the Detroit Lions are on the schedule this week, things will change.
Here's a question for you guys. Scott, you're talking about the upcoming Bears schedule. The Lions is pretty much the only winnable game, a reasonably winnable game that they have.
At least until their week 10 bye, yeah.
Right, for probably about the next 10 weeks. You've got Justin Fields, you've got Andy Dalton, and you've got Nick Foles. You've seen them all in a version of this offense. Foles last year, Dalton the first few weeks, Fields last week. Is there any one of those guys that you feel confident with taking out and running through the rest of the season, whether you've got Nagy as your head coach or not? Any one of those QBs that you're like, all right, this guy, at least you give him the chance, you give him the reins, they might actually do something.
Right. So I'm actually interested to hear Matt's answer to this question because I thought about asking him this very question. But for me, the answer is simple. It's Justin Fields. I don't want to see Andy Dalton play another snap for the Chicago Bears. That point blank period. It's just not necessary when you have somebody like Justin Fields on your roster. And again, if I'm Ryan Pace, the GM, this is something I would have done before the season. Why is Nick Foles on your roster? You traded up to draft a quarterback. You just paid Andy Dalton $10 million after promising him that he would be your starter. Why is Nick Foles on your roster? Trade him to – there's a handful of teams. I know for a fact the Miami Dolphins, the Pittsburgh Steelers, to name a couple, need a quarterback. Trade Nick Foles for some type of asset to hopefully bolster your offensive line, get an offensive skill position or some help on that defense. That's what they need to do. But as far as the answer to your question, Mike, it's obviously Justin Fields. He needs to develop because he's the future. Yeah,
I think Justin Fields is their best overall quarterback talent. It was nice to see Andy Dalton actually do something effective before he got injured in the Cincinnati Bengals game. If Justin Fields is allowed to move and use his talents, and then they can work him in and get him some nice, quick, short passes to build confidence, that's the best that you'll see from the Bears. And as far as why Nick Foles is still on the team, Scott, I think it's because of Matt Nagy and his desire to have a pocket passing quarterback. Like, you should have traded him. Absolutely. He should be gone. There's no reason to have 3 quarterbacks like that on your roster. The Chicago Bears can't decide whether they want to be in a rebuild or they're going to go for the playoffs. And I think they can make the answer very clear by firing Matt Nagy and just commit to the rebuild and building around their young up-and-coming quarterback. And here's the news flash. That rebuild's going to come whether Matt Nagy gets fired now or at the end of the season anyways. So you might as well just do it now.
Different situation, but they could look to the Cubs in Wrigleyville and figure out what they did.
No Bears fans wants to hear that right now.
Hit the reset button. So the Bears will welcome the 0-3 Lions to Soldier Field on Sunday, and you have to believe that the question will continue to be asked if Chicago falls in that one. When will the head coaching situation be shaken up, and when can they pin themselves to a particular quarterback that they're going to ride out the rest of the season with? But Bears fans will just have to live with not knowing what's going to happen and just hoping that week to week it gets better. So that will wrap up our conversation for this episode of Chalk Talk. For Scott Procter and Matt Morris, I'm Mike Cianciolo. We'll catch you next time.